AlphaPlus is a consulting organisation. We used to call ourselves an education consultancy, but nobody knows what that means. Essentially, we work with organisations like awarding bodies, but actually a broader spectrum of organisations on qualifications and assessment. Sometimes that's certification, sometimes it's exams, skills tests. There's a whole range of different things that it takes the shape of, but that's our thing. We stick to the business of measuring learning rather than engaging too much in the business of teaching and learning. There's some core competencies there. I suppose the key feature of our business is that a lot of our projects are really quite small. So, for example, processing the exam results for a professional body, the pharmacists, the doctors, the nurses, processing those results and deciding in a legally defensible way who's passed and who's failed. That's a small piece of work that we'll do 2 or 3 times a year, through to really large projects, managed service projects like the Welsh project that Gavin's talking about later, £20 million worth of kind of complete managed service. And it's difficult in a single organisation to do those 2 types of projects effectively together. The kind of traditional business thing would be to say, well, why don't you just stop doing the small projects? But the truth is, it's the small projects where you sharpen your skills. A lot of doing the big projects is just project management and kind of admin. One of our core challenges is to maintain a really high quality service at all levels of business within this specialist arena. And we also work across the world. This is probably not legible, but it's a list of our sort of current customers. And over the last 6 or 7 years, we've gone from basically being a UK organisation to having a bigger international presence. Okay, teamwork. I want to talk about 3 things. First of all, I want to talk about teamwork at a micro level and some of the things we're doing in AlphaPlus, which I think are moderately interesting. I want to talk about capacity building, how you don't just start from nothing and do teamwork. There's a kind of process of getting ready for it. And then the final bit is this macro level, so not just teamwork within your organisation, but between organisations. And I've put quite a few bad jokes in this because we're talking about teamwork, and it's a cheesy topic, and it's not culturally a great fit for me to be talking about this stuff. The slide, I don't know if you can read this, but the slide on the left says you can do anything you set your mind to when you have vision, determination, and an endless supply of expendable labour. And you might think, well, that's quite funny. But actually, a lot of the people we're competing against are in that camp. I think Google and Facebook, they're kind of there. They're the kind of 22nd century version of the pyramid builders. And we as small organisations have no choice but to be smart on how we expend our resources, because we haven't got that many. And we've got to be realistic and firm on what can and should be achieved. I'm going to talk at the end about vision and mission, another thing that really I shouldn't be talking about. But setting the right level of ambition for your organisation and the team that you work with is a big thing, I think. It's getting it right. So I was looking at Steve's presentation, which I really enjoyed, by the way, and I was thinking, wow, some of that is going to take ages. And it's really exciting, and it's going to take ages. What can we do realistically in the next 5 years? Sort of period where we won't all have forgotten what we said we were going to do. So not next year, because next year's tough, but 5 years. So that's about setting the right level of ambition. The slide on the right says sometimes the most important lesson you can learn is that you're not a very good team. I like this. This is my favourite slide. Of all the slides I ever present, this is my favourite slide. Okay? And I'll just take a second to explain it. So along the bottom, each bar is a question, an exam question. And up the side is how easy it is. So the one at the left, 0.92 or whatever, that's a really easy question. And then the ones in the far right are really hard. We're none of us, I think, very good teams yet. These are maths questions. I can't tell you who the client was, but the brief was to write questions at levels A, B, and C, grades A, B, and C at GCSE. So these are supposed to be A-grade questions, B-grade questions, and C-grade questions. And we assembled the finest team of maths writers that you've ever seen. I mean, they were the luminaries, the prima donnas of the maths question writing. And we said, crack on and write these questions. And we need them nicely graded into A-grade questions, B-grade. And look what came out. There are plenty of C-grade questions, which turned out to be harder than the A-grade questions. Okay? And this is the best we could do. This wasn't us on an average day. This was us on our best day. And the point is that assessment writing, in this case exam questions, but it could be OSCEs or skills assessments or whatever, is a tricky business to get it right. It's a team game, and crucially, our customers don't realize this. There are people in DFE who still believe that the grammar school project will work because companies like AlphaPlus can write 11+ tests that middle-class parents can't coach their kids to pass. Surely it's just a question of writing better exams. Now, we know we can't write those questions, and we've been telling them that. But deep down, they believe that we can, that we just have to try a bit harder. Writing good assessments is difficult, and it's a team game. And the next slides are a little bit boring, but I just wanted to talk to you about how we do it. And the messages down the left-hand side are the key things. We're rapidly moving away from it being a prima donna, supremo game where this subject matter expert is king, and you have this kind of supreme expert on maths or supreme expert on GCSE English, to a really complex team system. Our project model is 3 phases. We have a planning phase, we have an inception phase, which, as you can see, is actually the biggest phase in terms of the number of artifacts that need to be mobilized. And then on the right-hand side, there's what's euphemistically called delivery. I would say we are about 2/3 of the way to firstly making this system entirely IT-enabled, so there are no printed copies of questions rattling around. And we're about 3/4 of the way to having a system which can work for small projects, 3 or 4 authors writing a few hundred questions, to a project which we've just finished, where we had 70 people working not full-time, but nearly full-time for nearly a year. Being able to have a system which can kind of cope with that scaling and then scaling down is really important. I won't go into all the detail, but we're still not there. We've been trying how to do it for a long time. The key is definitely teams with multidisciplinary teams. So as you can see, there's a lot of technologists here, there's a lot of project management, there's a lot of subject experts. We divide our subject experts into groups, reviewers, senior examiners, and so on. And we still, if we're not careful, end up with questions where we have to throw 1/3 of them away in a high-stakes project. Okay, so I've got a whole load of process diagrams which we could talk about, but I think the lesson from this is that when you build workflow with IT, it's quite easy to end up with a system that can only work in one way. And we've had to be quite careful because some of our customers insist that we work in their way, not our way. Oh, how unreasonable. And so we just have to cope with that. So we have this kind of large-scale template model, and then we take out bits that we don't need or that the client doesn't want, which is a better way to do it than having to bolt on extra bits that you hadn't included. Okay, so those are some of the key roles. Those are just the subject expert roles, by the way, with the exception of project manager. I'm a sort of more of an entrepreneurial sort of guy, and with these big teams, you find you're 2 or 3 months into the project, and there aren't a lot of questions kicking around yet. And my instinct is to say, this is great, oh, lovely, another flowchart, but have you written any questions yet? And I've had to make that change. The change that I've been told to make is stop thinking of this as a cottage industry. This is a serious production business, and well done, John, on getting the business this far, but you need to let go of it now and let the people who know how to do this stuff take over. And I think they're right. We can now, from a standing start, we can deliver banks of, say, 1,000 quality-assured questions from English in English and 2 other languages within 7 weeks. and no amount of cottages in the Highlands of Scotland or anywhere else could deliver that. So we're just beginning to see the benefits of those systems. But the thing that's missing is the feedback loop. So why was it that the authors, these fantastic authors, couldn't write questions of the standard that we required? Well, firstly, it's a difficult problem. But the second reason is that the feedback loop isn't that strong, particularly in the UK. We don't gather and share enough information about how well our questions are actually working. If you ask authors how many times they see the psychometrics report on their questions, most authors would say, well, you don't really know. Nobody's really explained to me what that report means. Just knowing that a question was a lot harder than you thought doesn't necessarily tell you how to write a better one next time, but it's one of the best levers we have. And one of the things I'm most keen to work on is this feedback, or feed forward, as Steve called it, but the loop of kind of closing the loop on the quality of what you're producing. Okay, that's theme one, and I'm already a little bit over time, but we'll crack on. So this says, the bad news is robots can do your job now. The good news is we're hiring robot repair technicians. The worst news is that we're working on robot fixing robots, and we don't anticipate any further good news. So, look, I didn't catch that, but my feeling is that there's a lot of assessment isn't that complex. It's certainly not as complex as driving a car down the street. And computers will have an impact on what we do. I don't just mean e-testing. I mean computers cloning questions, computers mediating assessments in ways that we haven't seen before, computers watching people in videos doing tasks, all of that. I personally don't think that the industry represented here is ready for all of this. I think if you look at the history of step changes, some companies adapt, some organizations adapt, some organizations just kind of have to suck it up. And I'm really keen that we don't end up as the ones that have to suck it up. We end up as the ones that adapt. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of people think they know what they're doing with assessment. There's a lot of, look at apprenticeships, for example. Possibly the most shambolic reform implemented in education in recent years. There are a whole load of people playing around with serious qualifications. There are even some people pretending that apprenticeships aren't a qualification. We'll come to one of them in a minute. And frankly, that's a dangerous thing because they're playing with tools and opportunities that they don't understand. So I'm very keen that this community of serious assessment people get with the program. I was going to do a little demonstration. We're going to skip over it. What I'd like you to consider is the fact that 10 years ago, IT projects were a nightmare. BTL have always been a great software company, but 10 years ago, it was quite hard to make BTL's system talk to other systems. Quite a lot of money got burned up trying to connect together these systems. And there were some really massive failures, Home Office and so on. Gall's law is the thing that I cling to in those scenarios. And I believe it's as true now as it was then. And the point of this is that some techie stuff is getting really easy to do. I'm going to jump over the demo, but I'm going to tell you what the demo shows. In 3 months, so we have a problem managing our enormous community of subject matter experts. There's hundreds of them, and they all work for AlphaPlus, but they work for other people, and managing that community is difficult. In a few months and for a few £1,000s, we built a portal where they can self-service. So they go in, they register as an associate, we let them in, we vet them, the workflow is in there, and then they put all their details in, a photograph, their address, their CV, any information they like. They identify the skill areas that they work in, and then when our team want to communicate with them, we just email them all through the portal, or we can tweet them through the portal, or they can self-service all their connections. And crucially, we can search that portal, not just the data they've entered, but all their CVs, everything, using the wonders of Google. So if I want to find out anybody who's entered the word functional, for functional skills authors in their CV, I just put functional in, every author who's worked on functional skills, the projects they've worked on for us, what their ratings were from the project managers who led them. This is a huge resource, a team-building resource for AlphaPlus. And 10 years ago, it would have been a £100,000 project. It's now a £5,000 project done in 3 months. I just want to talk a little bit about teamwork at the macro level. This says, the discovery you're no longer a big fish in a small pond, or even a small fish in a big pond, but a small fish in a big fish. In 2009, AlphaPlus was a reasonable sized business and was doing lots of government projects, mostly for DFE and BIS, or whatever, DFES I think it was at that time, for the regulator, QCA and so on. And suddenly, with the recession, it all dried up. And we realized that we'd become very dependent and very aligned culturally to what didn't feel like a single customer, but actually was a single customer, which is the British government, the English government. And this was a big problem. And we were lucky in that we were able to diversify in terms of parts of the globe that we work in, and diversify into working with those organizations that you saw. And I just kind of have a feeling that there are a lot of awarding organisations in the UK that are slightly in that position, that in one form or another, their customer base is the UK regulatory infrastructure. I borrowed this slide from Ofqual. It's the Ofqual's view of the current qualifications landscape. So I mean, Ofqual are the people that control most of the vocational awarding body sector, all of the academic qualifications, quite a few professional, lower professional qualifications. And this is their view of the world. It's fascinating. That's a lot of qualifications, by the way. Each of those blue things is a group, not a qualification. I'm not sure England needs that many, actually. But what's particularly extraordinary is that there's no mention of skills plan. Skills plan is an existential threat for many bodies. And no mention of apprenticeships, because in the Ofqual world, apprenticeships aren't a qualification. I mean, for every single other person in the UK, every employer, every parent, every young person, apprenticeships are a qualification. My point here is that I think we're entering a period of extreme turbulence in qualifications. There's technical disruption, there's commercial issues such as Brexit, and there's also the fact that we've got some really quite odd policy. First of all, the good news is that Gartner, who are a well-respected research agency, identify 5 technologies, particularly credentials and digital assessment, that are top of the list in EdTech. So the good news is our customers, the education community, our real customers, are really interested in what we offer. The management consultants would also say these things: turbulence is opportunity, sticking to the knitting in terms of what you do, clinging to your customer, so niche organisations serving a particular industrial sector in a strong position, and then the rather charming kiss, marry, avoid, which is the bit about partnership. I think our success has been through working in partnership with other people, talking to organisations, persuading them that we have sufficiently shared culture to work together, and then delivering projects successfully, which means thinking about your own organisation and thinking about your partners. In order to do that successfully, you've got to be clear about what your own organisation is about. I would say it's these 3 things. What do you do? What are your values? And what are your competitive advantages in that? This all sounds a little bit management consultant speak, but I actually believe it's quite important. I want to talk about these 7 critical success factors for teamwork. I don't think there's enough teamwork in the awarding body sector. You've got to get going quickly. If the tender's already come out and you need to find partners, I'm talking about skills plan here, by the way, then it's too late. there's got to be some sort of value proposition in the partnership, and the commercial arrangements have got to be aligned. Partnerships struggle when the partners involved are pulling in different directions. One's got all the money, the other's doing all the work, that kind of thing. Cultural alignment is critical, but in our sector, there's good cultural alignment because we all care about the same things. We care about giving credentials to the right people. Then there's some stuff about shared processes. I wanted to just put this slide up because this is what I feel when I'm trying to build partnerships in this sector. First of all, the power of Ofqual, DFE, the various regulators that we operate under, has made some of us forget that we're in charge of assessment. We decide how we measure where people are at. And this applies at GCSE, at A-level, at vocational, professional, at university. We're the experts on this stuff. We're the awarding bodies. And the more we get pushed around, the more we get pushed into weird places. And there's some weird places emerging under the current regulatory framework. Secondly, the Venn diagram problem. The number of partnerships, I think, that fail because everybody's focused on that middle area. We work with loads of organisations who have overlapping skills with us, genuinely overlapping, other people who can develop questions. The key thing is the other bits, not the middle of the Venn diagram. So I'd encourage you, when you're thinking about partnership, to think about complementarity, not overlap. And then the final thing is the threat of new actors. I think if we look at the apprenticeships, the work that JISC is doing, for example, on apprenticeships, we can see that there are some serious challenges coming into the market, which we're going to have to be sharp to avoid. I hope that was useful. Thank you.